Okay, so this is going to be my presentation on Chicana feminism and how it has differed from other feminist schools of thought. This is going to be the final assignment for English 4317, Mexican American Literature. So, also, my name is Jesus Tanguma III. Let's go ahead and start. So, to begin with, I'm going to introduce a couple of the influential Chicana feminist writers, starting with one of the most influential of the whole movement, Gloria Anzaldúa. She's most famous for the work that we looked at in this class, her novel Borderland, La Frontera, de Nu Mestiza. So, within this novel, she touched upon a few very important themes to the Chicana feminist movement. So, to begin with, the Nu Mestiza identity, or the Nu Mestiza as an identity, sorry, is she uses this as a means of adopting the dual identities Mexican Americans are often faced with. Um, this comes as a result of Mexican Americans often feeling stuck between their Mexican and American sides of their culture, or often also the feeling of being both, having indigenous blood and that of the conquistador who came in and stole the land, basically raped the women, and eventually we were the mestiza who is a result of that. And so that is often a source of identity crisis within young Chicanos, so and Chicanas, of course. And so that is the identity she seeks to create with the new mestiza. She also introduces the idea of the borderlands as a physical, cultural, and emotional border. So, as it's part of the title, Borderlands is one of the key ideas within Gloria Anzaldúa's novel. She uses it as the concept to serve as a physical region wherein the cultures of both Mexico and the United States have clashed and resulted in something entirely different, that of the Chicano culture. As well, she uses it as an emotional landscape through which Chicanos must traverse. It is the idea that Chicanas don't have the, how can I put this? It is not an easy road to reach Chicana feminists' thought and education, to become conscious of that. It's not an easy means to traverse. So the borderlands is how Gloria Anzaldúa, I guess, can describe this experience. She also discusses the role of women within a machismo-ridden society. This is one of the biggest themes within the novel as well. Gloria Anzaldúa was a queer woman, so she did not follow many of the traditional roles set for Mexican American women. She liked to challenge the traditional Mexican passive life. She introduces this idea of challenging the roles with the virgin whore dichotomy, and she also discusses the traditional paths set for Mexican women's lives, basically. She talks about how within Mexico, and therefore often translating to the borderlands themselves in Mexican American culture, the paths set for women are usually becoming a nun, a prostitute in the streets, as she puts it, a whore, or a mother. And so Gloria Anzaldúa sought to create another path for women, somewhere where they could, um, I guess, seek academia. She wanted Chicana women to seek education as another form of path to escape the machismo society. She also talks a lot about the queer experience for Chicanas. That goes back into, again, escaping the traditional roles set for Mexican American women. So, let's see. She sought for the acceptance of lesbian rights for queers as a whole within the Mexican American community. So, let's go on to the next writer. So, Marta Cotera on Chicana feminist theory and why it has differed from that of Engl's. So, here's where I'll begin to discuss where Chicana feminist theory tends to deviate from, I won't say mainstream theory or for feminism, but where it differs from the white aspects of feminism. So Marta Cotera, I'm sorry if that's mispronounced, but Marta Cotera is a writer who works out of Texas A&M, or she did. As of now, I don't know where exactly she's at, but she worked out of Texas A&M. She's been active since the 1970s. Here she is at a Hispanic Women's Committee. This isn't her, but I thought it fit her what she did. She was one of the earliest proponents. She even predates, I think, a lot of Anzalua's writings. So let's get into some of her actual ideas. So the novel she's most famous for is titled The Chicana Feminist. I believe it came out in 1976. So within it, she touches upon how Chicana feminists are often inherently more radicalized than their white counterparts. Sorry if you can hear my cat. She's meowing at my door, but she states that Chicana feminism is inherently more radical than most white feminists or women's liberation movements, as they can only really ever collaborate with the more radical aspects or the more radical side of the white feminist movement, as they're the ones who have really only ever acknowledged and taken accountability and have sought to get rid of their racist tendencies. She also recognizes the importance of intersectionality. She recognizes that a true women's liberation movement must involve and include any human liberation movements as a whole, whether that be Black women or even, let's say, any other marginalized group, including queer groups, or any other minorities. So then, let's see. She also touches, I don't have this on here, but she also touches upon reaching a consciousness. I don't know. She states that it's just consciousness. I don't know if she means a class consciousness or something to that effect. But she states that feminists must reach a consciousness in order to work together against the systemic oppression they all face, though she does not necessarily specify what that system entails. I don't know if she necessarily means the white patriarchy or I'm leaning towards that, but wasn't too sure in the writing. So she also discusses so this is where I'll begin to describe her thoughts on the issue with white feminists. So the hierarchy of oppression. So she believes that the hierarchy of oppression must be addressed. There should be some sort of priority within feminism. So this is especially due to the fact that sexism cannot be, in her words, cannot be qualitatively proved to be more detrimental than racism. So to explain that a bit, Cotera believes that racism should be or can't necessarily be looked at as less of an oppressive state than sexism. Well, and she backs this up with providing the idea that a lot of times the prejudices that women of color may face, specifically Chicanas, white feminists or white female academics or whoever they may be, they might not face those same obstacles as women of color might. So she also touches upon white women's suffrage, how it was a major issue, or how white women's suffrage was part of the first wave movement of feminism, and it didn't really help. Mexican American or any other minority groups, because at that point, women were allowed to vote, but only in thought or only in law. Marginalized groups such as Chicanas and Black women still had to pay a poll tax, which oftentimes they couldn't afford. Sorry, hold on. Let me see when it's still recording. Oh yes, we're still here. Stay on the call. Sorry. So let's get that back on the road. So she talks about how white women's suffrage, it didn't really help the Chicana feminists or the Chicana women at the time, as they still had to pay a poll tax, or they couldn't enter white-only buildings, therefore preventing them from electing any officials of their color. Let's see. She also talks about how white women have often placed themselves at the center of the movement as the originators, or let's see. So, that they often place themselves at the center of the movement as the originators of feminism, while in reality, Chicanas and Mexican women as a whole have been organizing for feminist movements since the early 1900s, collaborating often even with white feminists as early as 1905. And let's see. So she also touches on racism and classism a bit. She discusses how as I said, racism within white feminist groups, it might not be outright, it might not be as you would say, like, okay, let's word it better like this. It's more passive than a Jim Crow law placed against these women. It's more of because you are Chicana, you might not be able to understand the level of theory that white feminists do, or there's not as much consciousness within the Chicana feminist realm, when in reality that's just not the case. So she poses a potential reconciliation between the two groups. She basically states that ultimately white feminists need to accept the fact that Chicana feminists are just as capable, if not more so, and they've both had to handle oppression, but Chicanas have had to deal with both sexism as well as racism, so they are at times even more qualified to talk about the subject. So that's Marta Coteras' feminist theory on why Chicana feminism has differed from that of Anglo's. So let's move on. Belia Garcia, I couldn't find a picture of her, but these, I believe, are some photos which capture the movement fairly well. We see some here. Our fight is in Barrio, not Vietnam, and one of the brown berets. So, Belia Garcia talks about the Chicano movement and how it relates to white feminists. So, one of the key differences for Garcia is one of the key differences between Chicana feminism and white feminism is that that white feminists are fighting the system created by their men, while Chicana feminists have often had the same experience as Chicanos or Chicano men within the United States, that is of oppression at the hands of the predominantly white capitalist system. So to Garcia, white feminists are fighting the patriarchy that they face, but not necessarily anything else. And Chicanas see their male counterparts more as allies because they are also systematically oppressed by the same white patriarchy. So she discusses that white women have had privileges not afforded to them as a result of their sex, while those not afforded to Chicanas are largely a result of their race. She also discusses how educational opportunities are one example where. Oh, actually, I'm deviating a little bit. Sorry. So yeah, that's the male-female relationship between Chicanos and whites. So back to what I actually have on the PowerPoint. She discusses the familial structures and how that is often a key difference between. Let's see. Sorry. Yeah, she brings in the idea that Chicano families are so different from the standard, the white idea of the nuclear family, two parents in the household, the male and female, and 2 to 3 kids, when in reality, the Chicano family experience is nothing like that. And so that often also creates identity issues within young Chicanos, as that is what they see often within the media. And so this relates to both what Ansaldúa and Erika Sanchez talk about in their work. Erika Sanchez I haven't talked about yet, but she'll come a little bit later on in the presentation. She talks about, so the main character of Erika Sanchez's work, Julia, she struggles with her identity because she's, her family structure, her family situation is very different from those of her classmates or even her boyfriend at the time. So let's go ahead and move on. Also, just I don't have this on the PowerPoint, but she does wrap up her article by saying she seeks, or what I ultimately pulled from her article is that I believe Elia Garcia seeks to reject the anti-male sentiments within white feminism and instead embrace Chicanos as allies to jointly fight the oppression that they face at hand. So, as I was talking about, a new generation, Erika Sanchez. She is one of our contemporary writers in. Actually, hold on. My dog is barking, so let me pause this for a second. Uh, Actually, no, never mind. Sorry, this is kind of a mess, but here we are. Okay, so back to it. A new generation, Erika Sanchez. So, Erika Sanchez, as I was saying, she's one of our contemporary Chicana writers. She also talks about similar themes as Antaldua and some of the other writers, but she provides a modern take on it. As Antaldua was, her book I believe was published in the mid '80s, I believe '84 if I'm not mistaken, and so it's just it's provides a fresh young woman's look to the ideas of the movement. So she focuses on Mexican American women's roles within their society, as do many of the other writers. So she talks about, well, she tells a story through a young Julia's perspective following her sister's death. She is forced to look at her world through a new perspective and begins to realize she needs to embrace her culture while also accepting that some aspects of it are flawed. Sanchez makes a comparison between old world traditional values and Julia's surface level understanding of feminism by often comparing the actions of her sister and her mother to Julia. So, yeah, she discusses women's roles and experiences within machista society. She discusses these. Uh, she discusses how her mother and sister both worked often very demanding jobs, wherein both also had to deal with the often inappropriate acts of men, such as the mother having to deal with sexual advances from some of her clients, as she's a cleaning lady. I don't know if that's a proper term, but housekeeper, possibly. Yeah. So, and her sister had a inappropriate relationship with one of her employers, the doctor that she worked at, or one of the doctors at her office. And so, yeah, those are some of the roles she talks about. Sanchez also used expectations set by Julia's mother to depict the norm of the roles set within a Mexican household. She expects Julia to be polite to all her relatives, to look after her father despite him being her parents. She discusses how she compares often Julia to her dead sister and says how she wishes she would be more like her, more traditional, more stay at home, when in reality Julia is nothing like her. So she also touches upon classism and passive racism a bit within the story. Classism, I believe, is a bit bigger of a theme for her, particularly when Julia meets her new boyfriend, or I believe it's her only boyfriend in the story. But yeah, when she meets her boyfriend in the story, he is a white man. His name escapes me, but he's a white boy, and she goes to his house for the first time, and it is a culture shock for her that somebody lives like this, especially in comparison to her, as Sanchez describes, a very rinky-dink apartment that with cockroaches, and it's cold. It's a definitely a culture shock, and as well, she believes that he judges her, or that he will judge her based off of her background. Basically, passive racism. It's mostly it comes up when the idea I had in mind. Oh, because sorry, I don't have this on my notes, but I remember off the top of my head. The teacher of Julia suggests to her that she can write her college applications and provide that she is Mexican American as a means to get in. I believe he says even that they'll eat it up. So she does so, and that's, though it's not outwardly racist, I believe it is using the trauma of Chicanas, of a young Chicana, Julia, to I guess, take advantage of it, take advantage of her trauma. As well, Erica Sanchez, another concept which really stuck out to me is she introduces the concept of leaving or leaving the family. So Sanchez introduces the idea. Oh wait, sorry. Give me a second. Um, what was this? Sorry, give me 1 second. Okay, so yeah, Sanchez introduces the ideas of Chicanas leaving the home, an idea often foreign to young women as they're expected to stay at home and look after their parents. Sanchez instead has Julia follow examples set by previous feminist writers, such as Gloria Anzalúa, and has her pursue further education. So yes, at the end of the story, Julia, despite the disapproval or misunderstanding with her parents about leaving the home, Julia ultimately leaves to NYU. And I believe this is a very important theme that Erika Sanchez brings to the Chicana feminist writings that we have. So to compare this to to bring all these thoughts and ideas of Chicana feminism, let's introduce one of the more notable writers within white feminism, particularly existential feminism, Simone de Beauvoir. So, Simone de Beauvoir, the flaws of a white feminist icon. So, de Beauvoir's writings, particularly The Second Sex, is a almost canonical biblical. It holds almost a biblical stature within feminism, at least from what I've learned. And despite this, it is heavily flawed, in my opinion. Um, to begin, uh, white feminists, including de Beauvoir, have often attributed the lack of diversity within feminism to be a result of low-level consciousness within minority women. I discussed this earlier, that they often just dismiss the experiences of women of color, or didn't fully understand the experiences of them. This is very evident when de Beauvoir uses Hegel's Hegel's master-slave dialectic. Hegel is a how can I describe it? He's a theorist, economic theorist from the early 19th century, if I believe, if I'm correct. But yeah, she uses this dialectic to basically analyze the relationship between male and female, particularly man and wife. In Hegel's original thought, the slave comes to realize he is oppressed when he realizes an independent person, or when the slave realizes that they're an independent person, and simultaneously, the master realizes his dependence on the slave, therefore leading to a reciprocal relationship between the two. Now, de Beauvoir, she compares a women's dependency on their men as similar to that of the slaves, however, never truly reaching any sort of reciprocity. Reciprocity, possibly? Something like that. So she states, living dispersed among men, attached to their oppressor with a bond like no other, and having no common religion, history, or culture, women have lacked both the concrete means to affirm their autonomy, and according to Beauvoir's analysis, the will to renounce their privileges and protection offered to them with independency. So, yes, she makes a comparison between a master-slave dynamic and male and female, man and wife, basically, that dynamic. And I don't think that takes into account the true experiences of because in her work, she's referencing the American slave, to be exact. And I don't think she fully understood the concept or their actual experience. Because if she did, I don't think she would make that comparison. Um, she also is very dismissive of the women's contributions to history. She argues that women have never had any power in society or participated in any means of productive labor, which is simply not the case if other cultures are taken into account. As seen in Julia's family dynamic, both of the older women within her household, her mother and her now deceased sister, both worked very demanding labor jobs. So de Beauvoir, attempts to tell an entire history of women without considering women who have not traditionally been as passive as Euro-American women. So yeah, as I said, de Beauvoir is speaking from a point of ethnocentrism, which really does not take into account the different experiences, and she's really only telling from those that she's familiar with, that of the the passive role of the Euro-American woman within the household. And while she is attempting to reject that, which I believe, I guess it is correct, it is a bit ignorant to ignore the experiences of other women. Let's see. Yeah, so that touches upon this point. Let's see. Give me a second. Let's go to classism. Yeah. So also she fails also, I believe, to really acknowledge classism as a form of oppression for women as well. So, aside from the racial biases already discussed for de Beauvoir, she also fails to acknowledge class, which has led her philosophical descendants to do the same often. Simone de Beauvoir focused on female passivity within society being ultimately dependent, seen in Hegel's dialectic. However, this experience is again not universal, as women of color have commonly been members of the labor force, as their socioeconomic status has prevented them the luxury of being stay-at-home mothers, as is often seen in the Euro-American dynamic. The attempts by white feminists to focus solely on the sexism experienced by women in hope of creating unity against their oppression at the hand of the white patriarchy has left Chicana feminists with a distaste for the works of de Beauvoir and other white feminists, as seen in how Marta Cotera and Belia Garcia have staunchly rejected white feminism. Now, I do believe that the two groups could reconcile, as posed by those two writers, and I think it is necessary just for white feminists to accept that traditionally their movement has been somewhat flawed, and the idea should be for them to resolve that, acknowledge that, and see how they can be allies within the Chicana feminist movement. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and stop recording.